handle the project from this point on, and he will. There is still some further funds that we plan to have a very serious talk with Mr. Dixon about whether or not we're going to pay for, because we don't feel that we should absorb all of this additional cost, that he, the engineering firm, should eat some of this and not Chatham County Schools. And that conversation has already been broached. We've had one, we will have another when it comes time to finish up on the project, to close it out and finalize everything. We don't anticipate at this point any further costs. So that's where we think it will end. The 467 is what we think will be the final cost of this project. It will be a quality project for the bleachers, home, and visitor side. And yes, it has gone over total about $80,000 from what was budgeted, but you can see what the additional resources have been used for.
Did the cost of the materials also increase
The
from
cost-
the bid in February?
If you remember back in June, I told the board that the price of metal was going up. One of the costs, first of all, this is an estimate by Dixon and Associates. We do not know what the final budget amount is until it goes to bid. And we bid them out separate. We bid out the general contractor and we bid out the bleachers because we were trying to get the cost down. And the project itself is actually 56 over if you take the taxes that we'll get back at the end of the year. Taxes is in this too. So that'll come back to us. One of the reasons we had a change order, which we asked for, of $27,800 because we wanted to put a retaining wall in behind the bleachers that was not in the original plan. And the reason we wanted to do that because the plan was a 3-to-1 grade coming from the tennis courts down to the track. Well, we'd have to go back in later and add that back in order to put a concession stand up behind those bleachers, which is in our long-range plan for that facility, and get that concession stand out of the dressing room area where it is today.
I also, in speaking to this statement that how can we take this to the commissioners with a straight face, I believe our commissioners are pretty sophisticated in public contracts. No one likes to see a project go over budget. However, and since Mr. Lucier's here, he can feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Whenever you have an estimate, I think everyone understands that that's just their best guess and it hasn't yet gone out to bid. And I think our commissioners in particular deal with their own public contracts enough to understand that an estimate is an estimate and the final bid, might be somewhat higher. So I don't feel that that casts any aspersion upon us as a board, the fact that that happened.
Well, one thing I must emphasize to you, what was in the capital improvement plan was for bleachers only. We changed the scope to make it a first-class facility with handicap ramping and sidewalks from the parking lot and things of that nature. We added in there. I mean, we could have put bleachers back up on that hill again, but I don't think that's really what we wanted in the long run.
And I also think it's very important to point out that while the term first-class facility has been used, basically we just met ADA, American Disability Act compliance and OSHA fall protection compliance. Our bleachers at most of our schools are being out of compliance for many, many years. And so adding those in just brings us up to where we should have been to start with. As opposed to doing business. Look at what fuel costs and metal costs have done. When the estimate came in February, if you just take the 6 months from February to now, you look at prices of metal, they're beginning to fall a bit. But aluminum, cast iron, cast steel, almost double and triple in prices in just that short. Well, they've been going up over the last years, Mr. Moody pointed out. So that estimate that came in was no way in the world, because those are external forces that we have no control over, that the project was ever going to come in at that budget, that estimate.
Well, I still wonder why we varied all over the ballpark, because in December, we had a joint meeting with the commissioners and came to them and said we need $645,000 for bleachers for 11 schools. And that's in the minutes. Okay, and then here, even assuming that all that was in that was the cost of the metal alone, that's $250,000 taken out of that one budget for one school. I'm not saying that it wasn't a reasonable thing to do, but it bothers me to see that the money, there's so little respect, you know, or little supervision over, you know, over a contractor that goes out there supposedly a professional. We have an architect on the job also, and you mentioned it was taken out of the capital improvements plan. I don't think it ever really was in the capital improvement plan, but in any event, if it was, we made an agreement with the commissioners that anything over $50,000 we would put in the capital improvements plan. And I don't think this was ever in there.
It was.
It was. And I can show, I can provide you documentation to that effect, if that's something
I've
you'd
gone
like.
back over the whole thing, and I don't see bleachers for, football bleachers for Northwood. I see $15,000 for softball, I think, bleachers, but that's all that's in, that I found in the capital improvements plan. I've got it right here, the long-range facility plan, the submission that went to the commissioners, doesn't say a word about bleachers at Northwood. Nowhere in here.
It was hard as I recall.
Last year, the home and visitor side, one was last year, one was this year.
Well, they're still not in the, well, go ahead, will you?
Mr. Moody has it, and I think that's the point. If you have questions about the budget and if we're going over on projects, that's the person to ask. He's got the most up-to-date, relevant information.
But
And I think that-
all this was well away from us before we were aware that it was taken out of the capital, it wasn't in the capital improvements plan.
But also, if you go to Mr. Moody, you find out things like, $11,000 is going to come back. Is that correct? After
13,700.
13.7 after taxes.
13.7 after taxes. I wouldn't have known that.